Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Simply Walk the Talk. Today we have a repeat guest, Catherine Staffieri. We had her on about a year and a half ago, we just discovered. It was episode 205. I even posted a video clip of my use of this program that she's going to be talking about, which is called NutriSense. And she's going to be talking today about what is NutriSense, what are CGMs, how can it be used. Today, Catherine's going to be talking about some of the updates since that episode, and we're going to learn a little bit more about what she's up to. So, Catherine, welcome to the show. Welcome back.
Welcome to Simply Walk the Talk. Our bodies and minds adapt to what we do most of the time. If you want to change your body and mind, you must change what it is you do most of the time. This podcast explores all things health, wellness, fitness, lifestyle, and biohacking. Stay tuned as we explore various thoughts, methods, and experiences from a multitude of conversations between our interesting guests and experts through many fields of work. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Simply walk the talk. Simply walk the talk.
Thank you so much for having me back. I love a repeat appearance. I think it's super fun.
I agree. Yeah, it's always nice because, you know, in life, there are changes, right? I think there should be beneficial changes. I think I like to call it evolution, right? So we evolve not only personally, but also companies evolve. You know, there's always updates and changes and things like that. And so that's the reason why I wanted to come back on with you. And I'm happy that you reached out. And so let's dive in from there. Let's just give an overview of NutriSense and CGMs, and then we can kind of talk about some of the latest stuff.
Perfect. Yes, absolutely. So it's always good to revisit it because I think sometimes, with most things in life, sometimes you read a headline or you sort of hear someone talk about something, you're like, yeah, I know what that is. And then you're like, wait, I actually don't know what that is.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's always good to revisit the basics. So NutriSense is one of the probably fastest growing health tech startups. We are a company that we feel like we marry three different areas together in that health tech space, right? We've got hardware, we've got software, and we've got personal attention. So in the hardware, we take continuous glucose monitors. We don't make them, but we use an Abbott Freestyle Libre or a Dexcom. Again, these are devices that you might have seen an ad for on television. You know, if you're watching like cable news, they always talk about the Libre and stuff like that, right? So we take these devices and then we match them with our app. We have this amazing app that we have developed, and our app will read your glucose data from the sensor. And then we pair that with the human touch and the personalized touch. And you get a nutritionist assigned to you to help you interpret that data. So that's really what makes us stand out from our competitors. Anyone can talk to their doctor, get a prescription for a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor. But once you have that data, you're like, what do I do with it? Or like, I don't know how to interpret this, right? So
Right.
Both our app and the nutritionist really help make that data applicable, make those changes, make that data applicable to the changes that you want to make in your life to reach your health goal. And that's really our goal at NutriSense, is to help anyone achieve their health potential.
Well laid out. Thank you for that. I can tell you've done this a time or two. So what I find to be very interesting, and I think the listeners, the audience may find this interesting as well, is that when I first got some experience with a CGM and with NutriSense, it was when I realized as a health coach, this might be one of the most important pieces of tech that I can use to help someone become more aware. And you might recall, I co-wrote a book called The Awareness Shift. And that easily could have been all about NutriSense. It could have easily, because, and the reason why I say that is because when a person is now accountable for what their day looks like, what they're putting in their mouth, and not even just what they eat or drink, but also how they exercise and how that affects what's happening in your biology. I think that's a really good start. It's a really good foundational piece, especially if you want to make changes to your aesthetic, or if you want to make changes just, to become healthier. This is a really good start. And so I would love to kind of hear what your thoughts are, and maybe some interesting stories on how a person can go from like never using a CGM, never using an application like NutriSense, and then where that can take them and how long they might need to use that, so on and so forth.
Definitely. So, we get people, I'll step back. Continuous glucose monitors were initially, they've been around for a while. They were initially developed for type 2 diabetics or even type 1 diabetics in order for them to get a continuous read on the glucose levels in their bloodstream or in their interstitial fluid. So these were medical devices, right, that were used for a specific purpose for diabetics in order to, dose their insulin appropriately. So those were sort of the main people that were doing using these kinds of devices. But what we found, and as you know, we've had this real influx of metabolic disease in our country. And so we say, like, how can we help people prevent metabolic syndrome, right? How can we reach their health potential later on in life? And so then we've been able to use these devices for people that are coming to us with a whole host of different sort of scenarios, not just diabetics. So that's really what I'm getting to, is a lot of people are like, I thought these things were just for diabetics, right? And so, I'm not just here to help someone who has type 2 diabetes or something like that, although we do help those people. So we've been able to take this technology and really apply it across the broad spectrum, not only for potentially disease management, if you do have type 2 diabetes, but also for prevention, right? So it's that preventative measure, which you as a health coach are all about, right? Like, yes, we might get someone coming to us for help that's already in a disease state, but we're really also trying to help people that don't want to get to a disease state. And so we're trying to find the best ways to help prevent that, right?
Yeah. Well said.
So again, so I've talked to so many different people. I've counseled. I've seen hundreds of thousands of hours of data, of glucose data, right? And people try and hide their stuff from me, and I'm like, oh, I know what you did last night. Like, you can't hide it. I see what you did there. But, I guess in terms of maybe some of the problem areas or some of the success stories, we just get people coming to us for all different kinds of reasons. So for sure, we might get someone that's a recently diagnosed type 2 diabetic or pre-diabetes. And so they do not want to either stay on their medication, or they want to get off their medication. They want to avoid having to take medication. And that's, or we have someone with cardiovascular disease. We get people coming to us for weight loss. We also have athletes, people that are just really wanting to optimize their performance, right? They've got marathons coming up. They've got ultra marathons coming up. They've got CrossFit championships coming up, and they want to make sure that they are dialed in to what's going on inside their body. We get a lot of women going through menopause. Like, they're like, what is going on inside my body? I have no idea. You get people sort of in all walks of life using this data to help them get to their health goals. So, when it comes to that glucose data, like you said, it's not just nutrition, right? So I can sit there and you and I can go through your data from yesterday, and we can optimize your breakfast, we can optimize your lunch, we can optimize your dinner, your workouts, like your sleep. That's, and that's kind of in that 500-foot view level. And then we can go, way out and look at the 5,000-foot level and be like, okay, how are you doing overall? Like, what's your fasting glucose trend? Are you trending up? Are you trending down? Like, so then we can also figure out those overall patterns that people are like, oh my God, I had no idea my glucose was going crazy at night, because how would you ever know that, right? Until you put something like this on. And then we can optimize maybe their dinner and what they're doing at night to help them sleep better. And over time, people are like, oh my God, I didn't realize making these small little changes, I would sleep better, then I would have more energy the next day. It really is a snowball effect.
Okay, a couple things coming to mind, because you're obviously well versed in all this. So, and I'm going to pose some questions as if I don't know anything about this, right? So, when you mentioned that you can monitor, so you as a coach, right, or as a nutritionist, as someone that is on the other end of the NutriSense platform, is it correct in that you, like, a person has to share their data constantly with a coach. Are they able to have a little bit more privacy? Is there something you have to enable for that to occur? And then also another common question that I hear, and I'm sure you hear it as well, is what is in your arm? Are we going to be experiencing a huge amount of EMFs from this device that's in the arm? Can you talk a little bit about that so we can ease some of the concerns?
For sure. So let's start with the actual device itself. If you are using the Libre, it is, I mean, they're both sort of about the size of the circle that I'm holding up here, maybe a quarter, maybe a little bit bigger than a quarter, like a silver dollar, pretty thin. We have some pictures on our website as well. And there's in the middle, there's a tiny little filament in the middle of the sensor, right? So there's a disc and there's a tiny little filament poking out. And you sort of like click it into your skin. And it's it's got adhesive and it sticks on your arm. The Libre is a 14-day Libre, so it stays, the life of the sensor is 14 days, and it's measuring, the little filament is measuring the interstitial fluid, the amount of glucose in your interstitial fluid for 14 days. If you're using the Dexcom G7, that's actually through Bluetooth. So I think when you were doing it, you probably used the Libre where you physically had to hold your phone up to the sensor to scan it. Now and I believe the Libre 3 and the Dexcom are Bluetooth enabled. So it's wirelessly transmitting the data to your phone, which would enable those EMF waves. To the best of my knowledge, they're not harmful, no more so than, say, if you wear AirPods or something like that. But certainly if people are concerned about it, you can always do the Libre 1, which doesn't have the Bluetooth capability and is just being scanned to your phone.
And really quick, if you don't mind, because I just want people to understand this. So first of all, on the EMF side of things, if you're really concerned about that, there are ways to sort of mitigate that. And to my knowledge, even if it is Bluetooth enabled, it's not constantly sending out a signal. It's
correct,
right? So it's only like it's sporadically or intermittently. But if you are worried about that, there are ways to make your body more resilient to EMFs because they are all around us. And I can certainly talk hours about that, but that's not for this podcast. So that's one thing. Just keep in mind that you do have some options. And if you are going to go with the Libre style, like the one that I used, there is a certain amount of times you have to do a
Right. You have to scan it. The sensor will store data for 8 hours. So in order to, you don't want to miss any gaps in your data, you just have to scan your sensor at least 3 times a day.
That's right. So what I would do is, like, before bed, I would do a readout, which was always kind of cool too, because I could almost, I had it dialed in so much that I knew how well I was going to sleep, because I always suggest to people that we should be having no food, no calories 2 to 3 hours before bed. And when you adhere to that, then you can see your reading. Your reading is amazing, right? And so that might help dictate when you go to bed. It might help dictate how well you're going to sleep. And so I would do a readout before bed, and then I would do a readout or a scan right as I wake up, or a few minutes after I wake up, and then maybe once or twice throughout the day.
Exactly. Yeah. We always get some complaints from people that are like, but I sleep 10 to 12 hours. And I'm like, well, good for you.
Yeah. Good for you. But that might be a reason why you might want to have the Dexcom, right? Which
Correct.
is going to do, right? So I just wanted to lay that out for people so that they know the options, because if you sleep more than 8 hours, kudos to you. Great. Don't be afraid of the small amount of signal that's happening, because there are ways to mitigate that. So that's that piece.
Right.
Also, I also want to highlight the fact that if you've never done a CGM, when you apply it, there is needle, right? The needle is only there to be able to insert the filament. And so what I like about it is that click sound is actually, it kind of startles you or frightens you enough to where you almost don't even feel the needle go in. And then when you pull it out, there's not a needle still in your arm, just so people know, right? It's just needle goes in, inserts the filament, you pull it off, and it's only a small thin filament. Is like a piece of film, right? It's a small piece of film that goes into the arm. It stays in there. And I was able to use that while exercising, while doing jujitsu, doing all kinds of stuff, so it's all good, everyone. I just want to put that there.
I know. I will say, like, probably even my friends are like, I can't do it myself. I just need someone to like shove it in for me, like I just can't do it and I'm like, okay. I even saw, I can't remember who it was. I saw a really funny like Instagram story or reel or something. And this woman goes to her doctor every time she wants to put out a CGM to have like a nurse do it for her because she's like, she can't do it. And I'm like, it's not that big of a deal, but
it's really not.
It's really
to each their own, right? Interesting. Well, so you really did help to kind of lay out some of those ideas, because I know we talked about this on the previous podcast, but it's measuring your interstitial fluid, not your blood.
Okay.
So can you talk about that and why that's important and the difference?
Sure. So when you you go to your annual physical or you get like labs drawn, that's a blood glucose reading. Your A1C, your fasting glucose, your A1C percentage number, that's all based on the glucose in your blood at that time. What the CGM is monitoring is the amount of glucose in your interstitial fluid. And so why it only matters is if you're trying to sort of like time a finger stick reading. So some people have an at-home glucometer, and that's how they've been measuring their glucose, sort of on their own kind of hacking thing. And when you take that, and there's going to be a lag time because the glucose has to diffuse across the barriers into your interstitial fluid. So some people will be like, well, my sensor's wrong because I just took a finger stick and that's not what my CGM is showing. And we're like, no, there's a lag time. You have to allow for 20 to 30 minutes for the glucose to diffuse across the barrier, the cellular barriers from your bloodstream into your interstitial fluid. But I talk to so many members and I say, it's not like, don't get hung up on the absolute values necessarily. We are way more interested in the trends in your glucose, right? So whether your fasting glucose is 96 or your fasting glucose is 89, like, yes, one looks in range and one looks out of range, but really I just don't want it going up. I don't want you going 89 to 92 to 97 to 105, right? Nor do I want, or I want, no matter where we are, to be like trending down or staying flat. And I think that helps people feel like a little bit more like, okay, like I'm not beholden to the number, which is really, people can get very much caught up in calorie counting and macro counting and counting the amount of reps of push-ups they do or pull-ups or whatever, right? And it's more about, I'm sure as a health coach, it's about the trend, right? Can you do one more? Whether you can do 1 or 50, can you do one more? And so I think it's that mindset of empowerment as opposed to like I missed the mark and then they're frustrated. Because as you know, what we're trying to do is we're trying to motivate people to maintain these habits. And if you force them to a number, they're going to get upset. They're going to feel like they failed. And so we really try and emphasize, because you have all of this data, this continuous amount of data, you can really see the trends and see how well you're performing over time.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of what I like to describe when it comes to talking about things like HRV. People get caught up in comparing HRV scores, which, for those who don't know, it's heart rate variability. And a lot of times people get caught up on the number. So like, oh my goodness, like, a friend of mine, like one of my friends, his name is Salim Najjar. He's now known that HRV guy. So you can look him up and see what he has going on. And he's really dialed in his HRV score. And he promotes his scores like being around 100, and it gets up into like the 150s and 160s. It's insane, right? Mm-hmm. And so while I think that is amazing, what I'm seeing, especially when I read some of the comments on some of his posts, people sort of get frustrated or get down on themselves when they say like, yeah, but my number is hovering around 50. Am I like, is this wrong? Is this bad? And I always like to pop in this idea of it's about the trending of it. So if you're at 50, but you were once before in the 40s, then you're trending in the right direction. That's great, right? And if you have someone like Salim, who, he's typically in the 100s and he drops down to 50. Well, that's not trending in the right direction, right? So it's all about the trends, like you pointed out. And then another thing that I definitely don't want to gloss over, just to give people a sense of security with what is happening with NutriSense and the whole world of CGMs, is that if you think that one prick in the arm over a 2-week period is bad. Imagine what people had to do before CGMs. They had to prick their finger multiple times a day. And back when I used to do that, I did it again before I ever tried CGMs. I just was like, oh, let me just try this. And I got to the point where I was like, you know what? I'm not pricking my finger anymore. I'm just not doing it. Now, imagine if you're in a situation where you had to. That's where CGMs come in, and it's kind of like a godsend to be able to just stick yourself one time or, a couple times over a month and get all this interesting data. That's where this is the gold standard, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Just want to put that out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are some of the latest things? I wanted to lay all this out so people kind of have an understanding, to at least have enough of an educated response or idea of what this is all about. What are some of the things that you've noticed lately since we last did our podcast?
Yeah. So the first thing that is a really big deal for us is that we've dramatically changed our support structure for our members. So when you were doing it, it was all async chat back and forth with your nutritionist in the app, right? So you would send a message, they would send a message, you would send a message, they would send a message. Now we don't do that anymore. We are on board with face-to-face video calls with all of our members, and it's all through insurance, right? And so we are looking at your insurance eligibility, and then depending on what your insurance will cover, you can be covered for unlimited video chats with your dietitian as often as you want, however you want, which has been game changer for not only us as practitioners, but certainly for our members, because how much, as you know, when you're coaching someone, things get lost in the details. Like, you're trying your best to explain it, but you're like, are they really getting it? Or I'm trying to be funny. Like, maybe they're not picking up on how funny I am, or that I'm joking or whatever, or this is serious. There's only so many emojis. But when you are talking to someone face to face, they can see what matters. You can explain the nuances of their data so much quicker than in a long text thread that they're like scrolling and all that kind of stuff. We can share our screen and we can go over your data together and be like, okay, let's talk about 4th of July. Like, how was it? Like, what was going on with you? And you can go through the nuances of different meal scores. It's been fantastic. The members love it. Us as practitioners, we love it because we get to really connect with the members, right? It's like a therapy session almost, right? You're like, oh, how's it going? What's going on? How was your weekend? That kind of thing. And you can really build that connection with your member, and you can talk to them pretty frequently. Or if you're like, oh, you're going on vacation, I'll talk to you in a month, like that's fine. But having the ability to verbally communicate with our members has been fantastic.
That's huge.
Yeah.
It really is. And I love that you touched on the insurance piece, because I know people are concerned, and especially if this is something that you have to do, then price is going to come into the consideration at some point, right? And so to be able to leverage insurance and be able to speak with someone like yourself is a game changer. So kudos to you guys for being able to implement that. That's amazing. One of the questions that comes to mind when I hear this level of conversation, people might be wondering, like, well, Josh, so you did it, but why'd you stop? What are your sort of ideas or responses to someone who either feels like they have to do this for the rest of their life, or to the person that feels like all they should do is just do this for a time period and then they're off to the races? How would you address that?
Yeah. I mean, frankly, from my my pseudo professional opinion, right, as a dietitian, not as a medical practitioner, but I think it should be once a year, right? It's like, oh, your annual physical is coming up. In addition to doing your lab draws, you should wear a CGM for at least a month, right? Check in, see how your body's doing, see what your fasting glucose looks like, see what your overnight glucose looks like, see how your breakfast is doing, right? Like, it should be like an annual, semi-annual kind of check-in with your body. Because, like, listen, what you learned, and behaviors that you implement one year, 2023, could be completely different depending on your lifestyle changes 2024, right? Like, maybe your job has changed, maybe your stress levels have changed, maybe ability to buy groceries has changed, right? Like, life is different than it might have been 2 years ago. And so it's really great to get that check-in, to get that actual feedback in terms of how your body is responding to your lifestyle right now. And so many times it's stress related, right? People are like, my glucose was great like 2 years ago. What's going on? And I'm like, well, any other, any host of things could have changed. Maybe you're not working out as much. And so your muscle composition has decreased. Your stress levels might have increased. All these kinds of things that you're like, oh, I didn't even realize I was slipping back into, poor habits or whatever it is. These things incrementally sneak up on you. And so this is a really great accountability check, a great motivator, and I don't think people need to wear it for the rest of their lives, but it should be something that you continually come back to as a way to make sure that your health goals are still aligned.
Well said. And also, I think knowing that some people are going to potentially skip over our previous podcast, one of the things that I thought was very impressive that I learned in doing this was the understanding of when to do a scan, or to at least, if you have the Dexcom and it's continuously scanning, so to speak, when to check in. I know initially there was this idea of, if I remember correctly, so correct me if I'm wrong, you would maybe do a scan like 30 minutes before a meal. You would do a scan maybe 30 minutes after eating a meal, 60 minutes, and then 90 minutes. Is that still kind of the idea?
No, it doesn't matter because it's just storing that data. So some people feel like they have to, they're worried that they're going to miss something. No, I would say it's as long as you scan within that 8-hour period, you don't have to worry about timing it to a workout or timing it to a meal or anything like that. Frankly, I think it's so fascinating. Like you said, you scan before bedtime and you look back on your day and you're like, well, what the heck happened at 3 p.m.? Like, I don't, and I think that's where it's helpful to have that connection with the nutritionist, because then we can ask those probing questions like, well, let's go back and let's think about it. Did you have something to drink? Were you on a stressful phone call? And 9 times out of 10, someone's like, oh my God, that's right. Someone brought donuts. I had a donut, but they didn't remember that,
Right.
2 days later, they just forgot to log it. And so it's really helpful to have that accountability partner. And I know that you had asked that question earlier, like, do you have to have someone looking at your data? So we are able to see your data, but you don't need to opt into having the support. You can say, I'm just doing this on my own and I don't need anyone's help, and that's fine. So you certainly don't have to opt into the support. But I would say a lot of times people come back to us and are like, shoot,
Yeah.
can someone help me? I don't really understand what's going on.
Yeah, I guess just to double back on that, I think part of the reason why, because I'm such a curious person, and I'm not at your level of being a dietitian or a nutritionist or anything like that. However, it was important for me, at least initially, to kind of know within my head, I guess, to kind of go through the conscious, unconscious competence feedback loop to know if what I'm eating is actually what I'm feeling, right? Like, so for instance, maybe I only did that for the first couple of days, but if I was going to eat a meal that I used to think was very healthy, and I do a readout and I do it like 30 minutes before, 30 minutes after, 60 minutes, 90 minutes, I was able to kind of see in real time, like what that score was, just so I could have my own set of knowledge to say, oh, okay, you know what? Tomorrow, I might not add the quinoa to that, or I might not add the carbohydrates or whatever. Or maybe I say I do need to add that. So I guess that was one of the things that I did just kind of as my own N of one study. But then the other thing too is being able to know what your scores are based on your exercise was also very, very interesting to me, because, and I know we talked about this on the previous podcast, but it might be worth mentioning again. Whenever I did a strength training session, my insulin number, you don't call it the insulin number, you call it the because it's not necessarily an insulin score, it's a glucose reading, right?
Correct. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So my glucose score went way up, but it normalized very, very soon, right? So I think that was that trending we're talking about. So it doesn't matter what the number really got to, it just depends on how well it trends downward.
Yeah.
And then when I would do sustained cardio at a low level, like, zone 2 cardio, then it wouldn't spike nearly as much. And in fact, it would sometimes go down. So can you touch on that a little bit?
Absolutely. And that's one of those moments where people sort of expect like, oh, had a high sugary meal. Of course, my glucose is going to go up. And then they look back and they're like, but wait, why did it spike now? And we talk about these high intensity interval training workouts or anything that's just like really, really intense. It can even be like an intense tennis match or something like that, where someone's really overexerting themselves. And that's the glucose spike on that is because the body doesn't have enough energy, enough glucose readily available to support the exercise that you're doing. So basically it's drawing it out of the storage spaces. That could be your liver, your muscles, that kind of stuff. So it's drawing it out, shooting it into your bloodstream so that you can use it for whatever your sustained activity is. And that's what we call like a non-insulin mediated spike. The body isn't going to produce insulin in these instances, right? So you don't need to worry about it, right? And so your glucose might spike, it might even go up. Some people go up to 180 and they're like, oh my God, what's going on, right? But it's okay. It's okay. You come back down. It's that recovery, to your point. It's how quickly your body adjusted to it and came back down. And absolutely right. When you're doing a zone 2 cardio, the body generally has enough readily available or can like draw it out as it needs to do, to sustain you along that longer, sort of slower, steadier workout. But both types of exercise overall, you should see lower glucose values throughout the rest of your day, or if you're working out at night, overnight. So overall, people are like, well, which one should I do? It's like, both are important. Both kinds of exercise are equally important for your cardiovascular health, for your mental health, and for your glucose management. And we certainly want to be focusing on building muscle, but we also want to be moving. And so both of those things are really helpful forms of exercise. There's no right or wrong.
And so what are some other additions to NutriSense and what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, so really it's the video calls, which have been like so interesting. We have some really interesting new partnerships. We have our ads on Lose It. I don't know if you know that app for tracking, which is kind of fun because, and the other partnership that we have is with Tovala. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them.
Mm-mm.
It's a really interesting company. They have prepared meals and you order them online and it comes with an oven. It's almost like a souped up easy bake oven, kind of air fryer oven thing. And so you order your meals and you reheat it according to the directions in the oven. So super fun. And we're partnering with them. And so if you're a Tovala member, we can help you pick out your meals and sort of, talk about the different types of meals and things like that, which is really cool.
That is very fascinating. And I know we discussed trending is better than the actual number. However, for the typical person, because I do want to offer support for someone who might be on the fence to getting this, or maybe they just started this and they want to kind of know, like, are they in a typical range? Like, what are some of those typical ranges?
Of course. Yeah. So we like to say overarching thing, if you look at our website and you look at any of our, if you look at the app and you look at kind of the screenshots that we have of what it looks like, we have a green band across your dashboard of your data and your glucose line kind of goes within that green band. That green band is your time within range. And that's what we believe is the best optimal range for your glucose to live in 100% of the time. And that's 70 to 140 milligrams per deciliter, if that matters.
And is that individualized, or is that based on a greater set of the population?
Great. That's just based on our research, based on our evidence. That's what we believe is a dedicated, good, non-medically related time within range. If someone is coming to us newly diagnosed type 2 diabetic, or for whatever reason their glucose is not in control, you can update your settings. And you can adjust that top range to be something that really fits your body where you are right now. Maybe that's 180, that kind of thing. And then as you start to get your glucose in control, you can narrow the band. Some people come to us real dedicated, really fired up, and they don't want their glucose to go over 120, right? Like they're really strict. And so you can adjust that bandwidth of your green bandwidth. And also some people come to us and they just run lower. Some people just sort of naturally run closer, like to the 60s, in the 60s range. So you can adjust that bandwidth down really to meet you wherever you are. But everyone, the default is 70 to 140. Now, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and that's a good reason to have support through a dietitian or through a platform like NutriSense. So I just wanted to throw that in there, but please continue.
Yeah. And then we have, if you remember, we have like a ton of metrics. We have like 1,000 ways to slice and dice your data. But we have what we call a morning average, which is our proxy for a fasting glucose. And so the morning average is the average of your glucose for the last 2 hours before your fasting, before you break your fast. Some people eat breakfast at 8. Some people eat breakfast at 10. So, depending on whenever you break your fast, you can set that fasting window, and your morning average will be the average of the 2 hours of glucose data. And that's really helpful. Again, if someone's been diagnosed as pre-diabetic, they want to bring these diagnostic criteria. So when you are at the doctor's office, they're going to look at your A1C and your fasting glucose. So some people are very concerned about their fasting glucose because it's been a diagnostic criteria from their physician. So that's when we can really focus in on that morning average and keeping that in our range. We have a more, I would say, conservative view, and it should be between 70 and 90, which is going to be a little bit stricter than what you would get in a clinical setting. But that's really, again, based on our evidence and the research that we've done for optimal glucose control. And then we also give you like 1,000 different scores, right? So we have a daily score, we have a meal score, we have your variability score, which is really, really exciting. That to me is the biggest predictor of insulin resistance. And that's a super buzzy term that I don't know that everyone totally understands, but and we can go into it if you want to.
Sure.
If your audience isn't totally familiar with it, or again, it's that idea of like, yeah, I think I know what it is, and then you don't actually know what it is. So as we talked about, let's go back to the basic biology. We take in carbohydrate. We eat carbohydrate. There's nothing wrong with carbohydrate. We're pro-carbohydrate at NutriSense. You take in carbohydrate and your body breaks it down into those little building blocks. And the smallest Lego, the smallest building block is glucose. The glucose diffuses into your bloodstream and floats around. And in a well-functioning system, the body goes, we got glucose, better make some insulin. And so your pancreas produces insulin, and that's a hormone. And your body, ideally, it should match up the amount of glucose that you took in. The body's like, super, I got the insulin for it. Insulin enters your system, and it acts as a key, and it unlocks the cells so that the glucose can come in. That's when everything's working, right? And then you're like, I got all this glucose. I'm going to go do something. I'm going to go like walk or talk or whatever, And so the body uses up the glucose and we're back to baseline. Everything worked perfectly. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work perfectly.
Right.
So what happens is over time, due to many, many factors, the body can be resistant to to the insulin. And so you take in glucose, the body produces the insulin, but it's like the key's not opening the lock. It's like, what's happening here? And so your glucose stays elevated in your bloodstream or your interstitial fluid for longer and longer periods of time. And that is where it will then get stuck to your red blood cells, and that will increase your hemoglobin A1C score, which is one of those diagnostic criteria by your doctor. So the more glucose you have floating around your bloodstream, it's going to stick to your red blood cells and increase that percentage. So we like to talk all of these things. It can get super medical. It can get, kind of high level, but in general, we can use all of the data that we're getting and all those metrics to see how potentially insulin resistant you are.
Now, I love the geeking out and the scientific data piece on that because it is important. I completely agree. It is also one of the metrics or one of the modalities I like to use when it comes to talking about postprandial movement. And so when a person finds out that they might be somewhat resistant, it's common for me to suggest someone to go for a walk anytime you put something in your mouth. Right. And so when I say that, the reason for that is so that we can try to encourage the muscles to use up that floating glucose or insulin. Right. And then what's interesting about that is if a person is adverse to going for that walk after having a meal, then that's a great opportunity to say, OK, well, then if you're adverse to going for a walk because it's too hot or it's too cold or you just don't have the time, then maybe you should reconsider putting something in your mouth. Right. And so this becomes a really easy conversation for me leveraging something like a CGM or leveraging something like NutriSense, right? And so I like to just point that out for people to just say, you know what? Here's a way I can use this well beyond just what I'm eating and what I'm drinking. What movement is needed, and things like that. So that's very interesting conversation. I love the variability conversation.
Yeah. I have a lame saying, after you eat, move your feet. And even my husband, he's like, all right, after we eat, we got, and it's true though. It's true though. After you eat, move your feet. And it's honest to God, you can also help someone get motivated to make that behavior change if they see the difference. I'm like, okay, eat dinner and sit and watch Netflix and go to bed. Now eat dinner and go for a 10-minute walk. And they're like, oh my God, that looks so much better. And you're like, well, the data doesn't lie. Like, this is your body, right? So absolutely, to your point, it can really motivate behavior change. And also it can help, like, we work with people with all different lifestyles, right? Some people are long haul truckers. Some people are, on planes all the time or commuting long hours for their work. And we're like, okay, well, why are you eating breakfast and then sitting in your car in traffic for an hour? You're going to feel like garbage when you get to the office. Like, let's eat your meal when you get to the office. And maybe you can do like a lap around the block or something like that. Like, that's that way for them. They're like, oh, I feel so much better now in the morning. And I didn't even know that was related, right? And so you can take that data and make actionable behavior change that can be really simple. I mean, it's eating here versus eating there.
And so what's a good sort of, and again, I'm generalizing this because I understand that the number is not necessarily important, but approximately in your research and your data and your experience, what is a good amount of time for a glucose spike to rise and then come back down to normal range? What is a good time?
Yeah. So the way our metrics are set up is we want the body to go from, whatever your baseline was, your pre-prandial value, and then to go up and down, back down. So we want to recover back down to baseline within 2 hours. Sometimes I'll give you 3. Like, fine, I'll give you 3. But with it, like 2 hours is really where we want. We want you to go up and down in 2 hours. Now, depending on how much glucose you're taking in or carbohydrate you're taking in, you could be really going up high, and then your body has to work pretty hard to bring you back down. And sometimes that can result in a crash, a real steep drop, because this is something called reactive hypoglycemia. So we see this a lot. A lot of times people don't understand why they feel so terrible. And at 2 hours, 3 hours after their meal, they're like, I am so hungry all the time. I have all these cravings. I'm exhausted. I have brain fog. Like, what's going on? And I'm like, well, because your glucose started at 95, you had lunch, it spiked up to 150, and then you crashed back down into the 70s. Like, no wonder you feel terrible. The body's like, help me. That's because you had an influx of glucose. The body overcompensated with producing too much insulin, and that's what brings you far down. And that just sets you up for that roller coaster of, well, and then I had a snack, or then I reached for the soda because I was so tired. And then you have another spike and crash, and then you get home and you're, eating the whole fridge when you walk in the door, right? So we help people normalize those spikes so that they have better energy, so they can go longer between meals. They can reduce the cravings.
And that's what we call, or at least how I like to position this idea around metabolic flexibility, right? Because we need to be flexible. Like you said earlier, carbohydrates are important. In fact, cortisol is very important. And a lot of people think like, oh, we should reduce it at all costs. But there are times when we need carbohydrates. There are times when we need cortisol. And so what I used to describe to people is when a crash like that occurs, sometimes, at least for me, in my experience, sometimes the best time to experience some level of that. I'm not saying that we should always have those big crashes, but it made sense for me to experience a crash somewhat in that level towards the evening time when I'm going to be going to sleep anyway. Right. And so like what I would say to people is, if you're going to, so like the way I do my diet is I practice intermittent fasting most days, and I tend to have the most of my carbohydrates in the later part of the day, because as I'm relaxing, as I'm maybe on the couch or I'm, getting ready to wind down, that's when I might benefit from that lower energy store. Right. And so it's like, do you want to have that crash in the beginning of the day to where you feel the need to have to recharge? Or do you want to experience that later in the day? And for me, it works to happen later in the day. And so I don't worry so much about a crash or a low score if it's in the later part of the day.
In the evening. Yeah. Yeah. And as long as you're kind of dialed into, now for some people, that crash in the evening can be like, oh, let me go grab some popcorn while I watch season 3 of The Bear, which let me
Good
tell
show.
you,
Good
I
show.
just was talking to someone about that. She was like, I was watching The Bear, and I was like, I know. I love that show. But
It's so good.
it depends on your ability to kind of like shut the kitchen down, if you will, right? And so that is something that, again, we talk to people about, and I say, okay, so what was going on at 9:00 at night? Like, I'm still seeing some spikes. And they're like, well, yeah, I was rummaging in the cupboard and I found, XYZ, or like, it's my habit to wind down as I'm watching the show with snacks and stuff like that. So, it can really help people to see like, okay, well, you had dinner. How do we sort of shut it down for the day so that you're not having any of that? And a lot of that then depends on people's sleep. So a lot of times people come to us and they're like, yeah, I want to lose weight, or yeah, I want to optimize this. And then they're like, actually, I'm just not sleeping great. Like, and so then we can kind of work into that evening routine and see like, alcohol consumption, movement, all that stuff that leads up to making sure that your bedtime and your glucose overnight is pretty steady.
And well, two things that come to mind in even that piece of the conversation. I know it's a very anecdotal and hypothetical, so to speak. However, what comes to mind for me is it may be a good indication for what it is you're watching or consuming, whether you're putting something in your mouth or not, right? Because if you're watching a show that gets you amped up, that might be enough to spike your insulin for a little bit, right? Just simply watching something, right?
Right.
That could be literally the stress we were talking about with, relationships or work or whatever. There's a little bit of a stress. So maybe a person could alter what it is they're consuming in terms of like their media.
Let me tell you, that really plays not so much at night, although we have seen people like, I was watching a scary movie and my glucose spike. I mean, it's so funny, from the stress of it. But really so interesting is that I see it in the morning. When people wake up and they look at their phone first thing in the morning, they're like, why is my glucose going up? Like, I haven't done anything. I haven't eaten anything. And we talk about their morning routine, and they are looking at their screen, social media, or they're looking through their emails, and they're like getting like amped up for the day. I'm telling you, that is spot on. It's like, what are you visually consuming, and like, how is that impacting? And I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think that's like so interesting that no one's really dialing into, because there's no way to measure that. You're like, how do I measure my body? Like the impact of screens on my body. Like you can kind of see it through this, which is really cool.
And that goes back to what we first started on, which is, I want people to understand that this is not just about calories. This is not just about what you eat and drink. This can be a whole solution for optimizing your health. And I'm known as a health optimization coach, right? Or a biohacker. And this is one of the coolest tools that I've ever experienced to be able to utilize and leverage to be able to help me to optimize my health, right? Yeah. And so I definitely want to get back into doing it again, because I like the idea of you saying that we should sort of use this as like an annual checkup. And so I'm gonna adhere to that. I'm gonna definitely do that. Yeah, for sure.
Come on back.
Yes. Okay. So first of all, you're pretty on brand with your headphones, by the way. The green.
I didn't even mean to.
Or maybe you did, Catherine. Maybe you did.
Subconsciously, yes.
Yeah. Okay. I want to make sure that we had an opportunity to talk about everything we wanted to talk about in terms of, at least for today's show, about some of the latest updates with NutriSense and some of the things that you're doing. Have we achieved that? Is there anything else you want to chat about?
No, we've really hit on it. And I love how still relevant all of this stuff is 18 months later. And I will tell everyone, I'd put money on it's going to continue to remain very, very relevant in terms of the health of, people in this country, right? Like we all need to be paying attention to it.
So then I'm sure people who are watching and listening, they see you, you're very beautiful, you're very well spoken, you're intelligent, you're experienced. It's all amazing. What does your day look like? What do you do? Like, how do you eat? How do you work out? If at all, like, I'm sure you do, but like, can you kind of talk to people, and let's make sure everyone knows that you are not saying that this is what a person should do, but if they desire to hear from you, can you at least lay out what a day looks like for you in terms of eating and exercise?
Well, I'll tell you and your listeners that I have 3 kids. So every day is not the same, as many of your parent listeners can understand. Whether you have little ones or big ones, every day is not the same. But I do try and get up. One of the biggest changes that I've made in my life since starting NutriSense and wearing the CGMs on and off is, again, that morning routine is getting up, is walking, being outside. I walk my early now. I get the sunlight. I don't look at my phone. I don't look at like my messages. I actually take social media off my phone during the week. It's just a distraction. So I'm not looking, I'm not liking anything. I'm not commenting on anything. I got too much going on. So, in the mornings, I've really made a conscious effort to kind of be present, be still, start my day at a lower level, like at a calm level, being outside in nature as often as I can. Just walking in my neighborhood has really been helpful. And then it's off to the races, right? I'm truly trying. I've been much more dialed into protein, really trying to get those in lots of different ways. My favorite thing right now is bone broth. And I get, I don't know if anyone's in the New York City area. I'm in Connecticut. But there's an amazing restaurant called Hearth in the city, and they make the most amazing bone broth. And the chef was selling it out of his window during COVID.
I remember.
Anyways, they ship it. And so I drink the Hearth. It's called Brodo, the Hearth bone broth every day. I love it.
I remember the Brodo days back when, this was a while back. They had this one location it was a walk-up window, which was so fascinating, right? I definitely remember that. And then a couple other companies came out after that, at least after my initial understanding of Brodo. And it's called Springbone. Are you familiar with Springbone?
No.
Oh, that place is amazing. In fact, the 2 co-founders or co-owners of Springbone were my first 2 guests on this podcast, like back in 2017. Yeah. So shout out to Springbone. They do amazing stuff, and it's all centered around the types of foods that I'm sure we both like to enjoy. Totally. Especially if you're into bone broth, you're going to be into the other stuff too. So that's really amazing. And I was just kind of thinking like, okay, so you're into the proteins. Are you yourself also using a CGM?
I'm not wearing one right now. I'm not. I was wearing a Dexcom about, was it March? I was wearing a Dexcom for the Dexcoms only last 10 days, but yes, I was wearing Dexcoms back in March. It was fun. It was cool.
Yeah, it is interesting. Yeah. So all of this to say is that you're obviously walking the talk. And that's what this whole show is about. And that's the reason why I asked that, is because I want to make sure that people understand that we are here, either through our professional career or our lifestyle, whatever, like we're doing the things that we're suggesting people to do. And that's walking the talk. We're living our lives in the way that we hope others can and will. And that's very important to me. So I have maybe a different question that I imagine you didn't have much time to prepare for. So we'll see what happens. So given everything that you've been talking about and everything you've been doing with being a dietitian and working for NutriSense and CGM monitoring and all that, what do you think you would be doing if you weren't able to be doing what you're doing now?
Well, this is a second career for me. So I used to work in finance. I used to work in hedge funds.
Very different.
Very different. And shout out to all my hedge fund people, all the investor relations and marketing professionals out there. You're doing good work. It's not a tough time. It's a tough time. But I would say passionately, I would love to be a chef. I know it's sort of adjacent to what I do now, but if I could just kind of work with food and recipes and do that kind of thing, I would be so happy.
So I imagine you do a lot of the cooking at home?
I try. Again, 3 kids. It's a lot of you grab and go and leftovers. But yes, I am. My husband, I should be fair. He doesn't mean scrambled egg breakfast, but yeah, I've got the majority of the meals.
Very cool. Yeah, like I could easily see you doing that. And the what was the name of the company you mentioned that does the little ovens and the meals? What is it?
Tovala, Tovala. Yeah,
Tovala.
Yeah,
I'll look that up because I think you remember. I don't know if I had written the book by the time we did our podcast in episode 205, but this is my book, called The Awareness Shift.
Mm.
And I co-wrote this with Tessa Cash. She's a former client of mine. And throughout the pandemic, we decided to write some material together. And so we came out with this book called The Awareness Shift. And in the back of the book, I list out some of my recipes and why I choose to eat the way that I eat. And it's all designed around this idea of being able to make a meal very quickly, get the most nutrients out of it, and also to be able to clean up very easily, right? So it's all kind of based around one pan, one set of utensils, and one dish, right? And to be able to kind of start from to a finished product within 15 minutes. And that was what I laid out in the book, right? And so when you mentioned being a chef, I'm kind of like, oh yeah, like I could see myself being, on that level, because I don't think of chefs as the type of person that is like grabbing every utensil to whip this and to whip that. Like, no, I don't want to clean all that up,
Right.
So-
Streamline and creativity. You got to be creative. You're like,
You have to be creative.
what can I do with chia seeds? You're like, I gotta figure out all the things to do with chia seeds. Like, it's awesome.
Yeah, I bring all that up to say that there's a company that reached out to me based on that, and maybe in the future, sometime in the near future, we're going to see some content coming out around that. But this company, you've probably heard of AMC before, right? It's like the European. I think they are the same company that created the Thermomix. Are you familiar with the Thermomix? It's
I
like
don't
this.
think so.
So it's very popular in Europe. I think it's based out of Germany. And then I know like the AMC group and some of the other people that I'm working with are based out of Italy, and they want to kind of work together with me as a health coach and put out some of this information as to like how I do things, because I live in New York City. I travel a lot. Some of the cookware that they've designed is designed to make that whole process so much easier and faster, and also still be able to be healthy and taste good and so on and so forth. So I might have to reach out to you to see if we can uncover some of those chef desires that you have, maybe we can work together. Yeah.
Call me. I'm here. I would love that. That'd be super fun.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, how can people keep in touch with what you've got going on personally, but then also professionally through NutriSense? Can you list out some of the best ways to be in touch?
Yeah. I mean, NutriSense, I feel like if you say it 3 times, your phone will start sending you our ads. But, definitely check us out online. I always try to direct people, if you're unsure if this is the right time for you to start a CGM subscription, is to check out our website. And we have an amazing blog with so many evidence-based articles that really link glucose data to a myriad of health conditions. So you can really see how this data is applicable to wherever you are in your health journey right now. But yes, we are on, all the socials, Facebook, Instagram, at NutriSense.io. I'm at Staffieri_RD. I don't know. I'm clearly not super social.
Don't reach out to her during the week, right?
Don't. Only on weekends. I'm only available on social on weekends. But yes, we're all around. Definitely check us out. Check out the blog. It's really helpful.
And then lastly, are you also still are you a part of the team that people could be in touch with in terms of, so you're one of the dietitians?
I am. Yes. I don't take as many members as I used to, because I'm doing all these fun podcasts. But yes, for sure. I'm still taking new clients. So absolutely.
Beautiful. All right. Well, we will definitely list in the description and the show notes all the information. So if you didn't catch the best ways to be in touch, then just click on some of the links that we have in there. And then I'll also try to find, I know at one point I had an affiliate link and maybe even a discount code. So we can dig all that up, make sure it's still accurate and updated. And I'll list all of that as well. And then just one last, what is the approximate price range someone should be expecting to spend on something like this?
Yeah, it just depends on your plan. We offer different, you can have a 1-month plan, 3, 6, 12-month plan. And just so that there's no confusion, your insurance does not cover your subscription plan. The insurance eligibility is for the video calls. And so some people get confused. They're like, wait a minute, I thought insurance was covering this. Your subscription plan, the CGM, the app, that is all covered out of pocket, although you can use an HSA account, a health savings account for that. But once we determine your eligibility, not everyone is eligible, but 90% of people are eligible for these video that is covered by their insurance plan. We will run those checks for you once you're going through the process.
I'm glad we touched on that because I don't want to gloss over that or miss that, right? So thank you for sharing that. And Catherine, thank you for your time. This has been fun. And hopefully we have you back and maybe we can show off some of your chef skills in the future.
Yes, let's do a cooking show. I'm up. I'm
Why
up
not?
for it.
Why not? You're in Connecticut, right?
I am. Yeah. I'll come
All
into
right.
the city.
Yeah, it's not that far. Not that far. All right. Well, I'll let you get on to your day. And again, thank you for your time and your expertise. It's really amazing to have you back, and look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you so much. It was awesome.
Thank you.
Simply walk the talk.
Walk the talk, talking facts. Move like me, but I move a little fast. Make my move, here to last. Fasten these seatbelts, I'm coming past. Take care of me, longevity. Hack my biology, better believe. Walking the talk, soul, mind, and body connected. Better come give us a listen.